Thank you for coming to a new speaker series we've curated at the Slavic Department at the University of Chicago that we've been calling Narratives of Power and Resistance in Central and East European, Russian and Eurasian spheres. Thank you to Ray Čapek and the endowment of the Otto Čapek bequest for Czech studies and for the region for funding this series, giving us the possibility to bring really inspiring voices and experiences to our campus. The first speaker in this series in September was Šimon Panek, who is a compatriot of Václav Havel during the Velvet Revolution, and who was the co-founder of the Czech humanitarian organization People in Need. And I want to recognize Timothy Jenkins, who's visiting with us, who's about to open their Chicago office. So I feel like from September, there's been some progress in that area of human rights emanating from Chicago. Tonight we have a wonderful guest. I'm going to introduce first, however, our host, Daria Cymbaluk, who is in the second year of her appointment at the University of Chicago as an assistant professor, and she has been instrumental at making the University of Chicago a home for Ukrainian studies, and we're also grateful. She's also just published her incredibly moving and beautifully written book, Ecocide in Ukraine, with Polity Press. So if you don't have a copy of this book, you should get it. Daria let me know that Maksym Butkevych was coming through the US, coming to Harvard and Ohio State and to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and can we please bring him in the busiest week of the quarter? I said, absolutely, we must, and thank you. And so she did an amazing, what's it?
Which is the spirit of our
Yes, absolutely. All in when we can. So thank you to Daria, thank you to the department, to the Čapek Fund, to Razum for Ukraine for helping to fund this event, to the Posen Family Center for Human Rights at the University of Chicago, to the Center for East European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at the University of Chicago, and finally, big thanks to the Neubauer Collegium for helping us bring this event to this beautiful space and with all of this wonderful support.
Stephen for making it.
And absolutely, sometimes I forget, but I don't really forget because it wouldn't happen without our wonderful department administrator, Stephen Carver. Thank you, Stephen. And to our department graduate students for helping to host as well. So, and one more thing, again, before I get to our main event, just as much as we're trying to make the University of Chicago home for Ukrainian studies, or really a hub for Ukrainian studies in the Chicago region, I want to let you know about one more thing that is happening in the spring. The internationally renowned artist Ai Weiwei is bringing an installation that he first dedicated in Kiev in September called Three Perfectly Proportioned Spheres and Camouflage Uniforms Painted White. They were first displayed, this artwork was first displayed in Kiev's Pavilion number 13 in September, and it's engaging with war in Ukraine, and it's going to be installed here on our campus in spring. And I know that our speakers are already been thinking about this work. So now to our wonderful speaker. Change my media form here for a second. Our guest today is Maksym Butkevych, who is a Ukrainian journalist, human rights activist, and a war veteran. He holds a degree in philosophy from Kiev National Taras Shevchenko University and an MA in anthropology from the University of Sussex. And for those of you who are undergraduate university students, here's someone who came out of the university and said, there are problems in the world, there are problems at home, there are problems abroad, and I want to report on them, and I want to try to solve those problems. And his career has really been incredibly inspiring, and I hope that you'll learn a lot from him today. Maksym Butkevych has worked extensively in the media after finishing university at the major Ukrainian TV networks, at BBC World Service in London, and he co-founded the independent Ukrainian radio station Hromadske Radio. At the same time that he was a journalist, he was also advocating actively for human rights and social justice, assisting refugees, protesting war, discrimination, and racism, and supporting freedom of speech and assemblies. Then after the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion into Ukraine, in February 2022, he joined the Ukrainian armed forces and was captured by Russian forces and sentenced by a Russian court to 13 years of imprisonment in the fabricated criminal case, which you can read about in the Amnesty International briefing, and it is really difficult to read, but really important to read, like the extent of the fabrication and the details of the fabrication, the photographic details of this fabrication. He was released from captivity in October 2024, and after spending 2 years and 4 months in Russian captivity, after 2 years and 4 months in Russian captivity. In 2025, Maksym co-founded charitable foundation Principle of Hope, and in 2025, bringing our series to a circle, he was awarded the Václav Havel Prize by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. He's also published a collection of his essays written when he was in captivity, which is helping to bring his work and his inspiring story to the international stage. And he's joined today on our stage here at University of Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. I'm really humbled by this introduction. And thank you very much to all of you for coming. Thanks to the organizers of this event for this invitation and for opportunity to be here. Then maybe just I'll say a few words before we move to the questions, because nowadays I prefer not to give speeches, although I do from time to time, I have to, but a conversational mode is somehow better for me. For many years of my life, human rights were at the very core of what I was doing, and I was focused primarily on migration-related human rights issues. I was assisting refugees and asylum seekers in Ukraine who had to flee to Ukraine from their home countries due to persecution because of their political affiliations or religious beliefs or belonging to certain group. I worked with issues of anti-discrimination, trying to advance rights of discriminated groups and minorities in Ukraine. I was also interested in other human rights issues, as it was mentioned, issues of prevention of torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, freedom of expression and freedom of assemblies. I didn't know at the time, of course, that with some of those issues I will have to familiarize myself closer later on, but from the other angle. And actually, because I was a human rights defender at the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion, that was paradoxically probably one of the reasons why I joined the armed forces of Ukraine. Because I understood pretty well that if Russia prevails, excuse me, if it takes over, there will be no human rights activism on occupied territories. There will be no human rights defense, because human rights as a notion is absent from the ideology of contemporary Russia. It is void. And I knew pretty well the situation with human rights in Russia. It degraded in front of my eyes. I was in touch with colleagues from the Russian human rights movement. And among refugees whom I was dealing with, there were refugees from Russia who had to flee Russia. So I understood that even if human rights situation in Ukraine was far from ideal, of course, and it is still far from ideal. You know, for human rights defenders, human rights situation is never ideal. So there is always something to strive for. But over the years of campaigning and struggle and advocacy and education, Ukrainian human rights movement achieved quite a lot. And I knew that if Russia prevails, that all would be just wiped out, just erased, and all years of our efforts would be put down the drain. I was called a human rights defender, and it's an honorable title to me, because it means that one should really try to defend human rights on an everyday basis to be called so. I thought to myself, if I'm called this honorable title, I have to defend human rights with means available to me. And unfortunately, the biggest threat to human rights in Ukraine was and still is Russian aggression. So my only option to defend human rights in Ukraine was to take up arms and to resist it. And this is why I joined the Defense Forces of Ukraine, the Armed Forces of Ukraine. My platoon took part in liberation of Kyiv region in springtime of 2022. And that was the first time when I encountered testimonies and evidences of what occupation looked like. Because we talked to local people who were liberated, who lived under occupation for a month. And that was the first experience I had firsthand with the consequences of the occupation. Unfortunately, within 3 months and a half of me being in the armed forces, I was captured together with 8 of my brothers in arms by Russian forces. By the way, yesterday, well, it's already yesterday in Ukraine, there was another prisoners of war exchange. And among those exchanged is one of my brothers in arms who was still in captivity. So it's a big day for me. Really, I'm so happy about him. And I spent the next 2 years and 4 months in Russian captivity. Sometimes in difficult times, I told myself that this is a field research trip in human rights violations. You know, that I'm studying in practice issues which I was interested in before, theoretically or from the human rights activist point of view. And now I was the one going through that myself personally. One of the first lessons I've learned about captivity was a lesson about violence for myself personally. I used to think before that violence, as many people do, is about inflicting physical harm upon the other person, or maybe psychological harm, but physical harm in the first place. While actually I realized that this is a consequence of violence, but violence is primarily about turning other person into an object. It's about making that person doing whatever you tell him or her to do. We were forced to learn anthem of so-called Luhansk People's Republic by heart, and then Russian anthem by heart. So now I know Russian anthem. I'm not very happy about it, but it was an interesting thing. And we have to sing it when we were ordered to. We had to stand up straight when we heard it. We had to squat or to do push-ups when we were ordered as many times as our guards wanted us to do. We had to say what we were told to say, and we had to shut up when we were told to shut up. And basically, this feeling of total powerlessness, total absence of control over one's own situation, was the result of this atmosphere of fear and violence which was created for Ukrainian prisoners of war. But later on I realized that this is something also quite common on a different level for the overall ideology of the Russian world. Because in the Russian world, the human being has no relevance, it has no value. The value number one is the state, and the state has a monopoly on truth, on agency and vital decision-making. And the state is, of course, embodied in the figure of the national leader. While we were told, I was kept with Ukrainian prisoners of war, but after I was convicted on fabricated charges by the court to 13 years of imprisonment, I was transferred to the other part of the prison where those accused of criminal offenses were held. So I spent quite some time with them. Later on, I was transferred to the prison camp, to the penal colony. And the majority of its population were those convicted for criminal offenses. Most of them lived under Russian occupation for 8 or more years already by that time, being totally under influence of Russian propaganda. And we had extensive conversations sometimes, and they told me that we don't have any agency, we don't have any influence upon our own lives. Everything is decided by the authorities. We cannot really have any impact upon our own future. But instead, we belong, well, we have no responsibility for what's going on, and we belong to this great power, Russia, which everyone around us is afraid of. And it means that they respect us. These people really confused fear and respect. I mentioned that I've learned Russian anthem. I had to. And to me, it was quite illustrative because it says, in all places, it talks about the state. The state, the country, the fatherland, the motherland. It mentions people only once and in a very specific context. It goes as, we are given strength by our loyalty to the state. This is how it was, this is how it is, and this is how it will be forever. Нам силу дает наша верность отчизне, так было, так есть и так будет всегда. It's not that the state is strong as long as we are loyal to it. No, it's vice versa. We are strong as long as we are loyal, and when we stop being loyal, we are powerless. And this is such a stark contrast to the worldview which Ukrainians nowadays have. Because for Ukrainians, for all those I know, including my brothers and sisters in arms at the front line, human being is a value number one. And the state is just a tool for common construction of our common future. So human agency and human dignity and human rights mean a lot to Ukrainians. And of course, the notion of freedom, without which it's not possible to realize any agency and to respect anyone's dignity. So the notion of freedom, which is absent in the ideology of the Russian world, is at the core of what Ukrainians believe in. But this is why also all people I know in Ukraine, we believe that Ukraine defends not only its territorial integrity or independence, of course it does, but it defends certain set of values, because this is a war of values. It's not war for territory, of course. Russia doesn't need more territories. Russia is too big, it doesn't know what to do with its own territory, you know. So it's about a clash of worldviews and set of values which Ukrainians defend. We share with so many peoples around the globe, all those who strive to live freely in mutual respect towards each other's dignity and without fear. So this is why we understand that this is a common struggle, because again, Russian assault is not only against Ukraine. In their propaganda shows, which I had to consume for some time, they insist actually upon the war being waged not against Ukraine, but against the degraded liberal West, which is so infested with all these ideas of, you know, individualism and human liberties. But the Russian soldier is so ready to remind what traditional values are. This is why Ukrainians believe it is a common struggle. And we also understand that we were given at the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion a few weeks' time, not more than that. But we are continuing to resist for 4 years now, and we wouldn't be able to do so without international solidarity. It is possible only because there is international solidarity and assistance to Ukraine, but also we understand that this solidarity is not some sort of pity towards the underdog. It is about our common struggle, because if Ukraine fails, and it won't, but if it does, it would mean defeat not only for Ukrainians, but for everyone who shares our common values. So with this notion of solidarity, I would like to conclude, and then we'll go to questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's hard to say something after your speech, and it's also just such an honor to have you here with us, and to meet you in person, to hear you speak. And I remember when you were still in imprisonment, and there was a campaign, and we were trying to raise awareness. And seeing you here with us kind of gives me hope for other sorts of miracles that are possible, and hearing about your brother in arms who also got released. So
Yeah.
Chances the hope that
it's a great day.
that the other miracles are coming and are possible. Is it not on? It's on. Is it?
It is on.
Okay, but it's far from. I should. Okay. Yeah.
No, but your mic is here. It's clip.
This is it. Is it better? Okay, maybe I'll clip it here. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And you already talked about, of course, your vast experience of human rights. And I feel so ashamed because we talked earlier and I didn't know about your profound involvement in also in the resistance against proliferation of mononuclear blocks in Ukraine. I mean, it just... thank you all, really for leading so many struggles in Ukraine in the past. And you talked how that experience of being a human rights defendant impacted your decision to enlist and to defend human rights with arms in your hand, with arms, holding arms. Could I ask you, thinking of the longer kind of duration of the war in 2014 and 2022, if you could also talk about that first phase of the war, and you worked during that period with also maybe people who are displaced, and you know how you experienced then impacted your perception of what was happening there, but also thinking now, as you said, you know, of experience in firsthand imprisonment and violence. How does it change your view of human rights?
Mm-hmm. When the war broke out in 2014, and you know, for Ukrainians now, when we say when the war started, it's not about 2022, it's about 2014. When the Russian full-scale invasion started, it's in 2022, but the war was started in 2014 with Russia occupying Crimea and inciting the war in the east of Ukraine, actually intervening there and supporting Russia, pro-Russia paramilitaries, and also moving in regular troops. As I mentioned before that, I worked with my colleagues trying to assist refugees and asylum seekers. We accumulated certain knowledge, certain experience by the time. So when the war broke out, we started to assist internally displaced persons. We were among the first organizations who actually said that when any sort of occupation starts, one should wait for issues related to the internal displacement, forcible internal displacement. So for a couple of years, assistance to IDPs was our primary goal. And I think that also influenced my decision later on in 2022 to join the armed forces, because I remember in the wintertime of 2014-2015, I was coordinating the coalition of non-governmental organizations and Ombudsman's Office of Ukraine, which was called Resource Center for IDPs. And I realized that I'm able to do what I do only because there are others at the front line who are allowing me to do that by defending me, who are buying me time with their own sacrifices, with their defense. There were my friends who were there as well. And at the time, I didn't join the armed forces, although I had this thought. But when Russian full-scale invasion came, I decided that I should be, this time I should be among those who allow my human rights colleagues to do their job by defending them at the front line. So that influenced me a lot. And experience of what was happening both in occupied Crimea and in occupied parts of Luhansk and Donetsk region in the east of Ukraine, that was actually one big situation of massive human rights violations. I joined the campaign for the release of Ukrainian political prisoners arrested by Russian FSB. The case of Ukrainian film director Oleg Sentsov, activist Alexander Kolchenko, Gennady Afanasyev. I was part of solidarity group with them, so we initiated a lot of public events related to their plight, and we were very happy when they finally were released in 2019. So I tried to follow the events there, and I think this impacted upon my decision to join the defense forces. And on human rights, several times I was asked during different public events in different places, different countries, whether I'm disillusioned with human rights, whether I'm disillusioned with human rights institutions, and whether I'm disillusioned with human rights as a concept, because I've been to a place where human rights mean nothing. And international conventions, international humanitarian law, they don't have a place in practice of Russia. It is a consistent policy of Russia, I believe it now, to undermine and destroy international humanitarian law by ignoring it and by violating it on massive scale. Well, just one illustration. When we were captured and we were still transported we didn't know where we are going, of course. It turned out to be the city of Luhansk, occupied in 2014. Still on our way, we were visited by Russian military propagandists who did propaganda videos with us. Like they just filmed another group of Ukrainian soldiers who were captured. And they told me, you think you are POWs, you are prisoners of war, but you are not. You just disappeared in a battle zone, and if you don't follow every single order you are given, you might never appear again. It's only after you reach your final destination and you are registered, this is when you become POWs, and this is when Geneva Conventions will start to apply to you. And they were lying, of course, because Geneva Conventions never started to apply to us. It's about conditions we were detained in, it's about violence, it's about beatings, it's about fabrication of criminal cases, confession extracted under duress. I really admire this word in under duress because it helps to avoid the word torture, under duress. Yeah. But to me, I would say nowadays human rights are more precious than ever before. Specifically because to treasure them, it is more obvious that one has to treasure them after being in a place where they are consistently ignored and violated. The only thing that really changed is that a lot of people take at least some basic limited implementation of human rights for granted. It's always here, certain degree of freedom of expression, or a lot of it, freedom of assemblies, freedom to influence, to make your own choices and influence the future. While in captivity and after captivity, you understand that they are not for granted, they are not free. They should be treasured, they should be protected, and they should be defended if necessary. So I believe one has to find him or herself in a place where they are ignored to understand how important they are and what the world would look like without human rights, which we sometimes take for granted today.
Thank you for reminding us about that. Um, yeah, and thinking of, you've talked about the experience of dehumanization and forms of violence to which you were subjected, but also people all over Ukraine are subjected to different extent because of the massive attacks that we are witnessing, even destruction of critical infrastructure, not having access to basics like water and heating all across Ukraine, and of course living in that kind of constant form of violence. One of the responses, of course, that is you are constantly dehumanized. So how do you manage then to preserve humanity in those conditions? And whether you could comment on how reflect on what's happening in Ukraine overall, maybe share from your experiences, which I think one of the biggest challenges in this constant conditions of terror and violence, not to respond back as well.
Yeah.
Aggression.
Ukraine currently is going through a very difficult time. It's not only about the areas close to the front line, to the battle zone. It is about the majority of territories in Ukraine. I'm from Kiev myself. My native city is beautiful Kiev. But of course, nowadays, when I'm on a trip abroad, I'm in constant touch and communication, given the time difference, with my friends and relatives and loved ones back home. And it breaks my heart to think about what they are going through, because Kyiv is freezing now, because they've hit the critical energy infrastructure, and a lot of districts in Kyiv, they are without heating and with blackouts, power cuts, and sometimes without water. And overall, the last year was actually the deadliest year for Ukraine when it comes to civilian casualties. During the last year, the civilian casualties in Ukraine were up, if I'm not mistaken, 31% from the previous year. So basically, in last year, Russia intensified attacks against civilian targets in Ukraine, and many more people were killed and wounded. We manage. We are going through that, although unfortunately, we now have not only people injured in air raids or Shahed drones attacks or missile strikes, but also people who are freezing to death in their homes. I think what helps to preserve humanity actually is what Ukrainians do to overcome these conditions, because this is mutual aid, and this is solidarity, which really helps us. People help each other. There are local initiatives, would they be on the spot in a building or in a block, or there are non-governmental organizations, or just people just helping their neighbors, especially the elderly and those who cannot sustain themselves under these difficult conditions. And this human solidarity is something that keeps us going. Ukraine, for all these years, especially the last 4 years of full-scale invasion, has witnessed incredible surge of this mutual assistance. There is a huge volunteer movement which gathers a lot of resources on different levels for the armed forces of Ukraine, but also for humanitarian causes. Would it be to help IDPs or people in need, or animals for that matter? Actually, this topic somehow is very, very popular and important now in Ukraine, to help animals which were left by those who had to evacuate their homes, for instance, or which had to be brought to other areas of Ukraine. So this mutual assistance is on the level I've never witnessed in my life before. And I think this solidarity is something that really makes us human. So we understand that we are able to continue to keep going and to defend what is important to us due to the others. And it is very relevant to me personally, because when I was in captivity, one of the thoughts that kept me going was reliance upon the others. I thought about my loved ones, about my colleagues, about my friends, just putting all the trust in thought that they haven't forgotten me, that they remember about me, that they talk about me, that they fight for my release as well as for the others. And this thought about how many wonderful people I met in my life, and that they do right things at the moment, it kept me going. So I believe another kind of a lesson I've learned from captivity was to what extent our freedom is dependent upon the others. It's not only limited by the others. It is actually possible due to the others and due to this solidarity and our mutual humanity. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maksym. Which brings me kind of maybe to move to extend on this point and thinking also of collective memory of solidarity within Ukraine and also your experiences in my class on Tuesday. We discussed Revolution Granite, the first of the Maidan revolutions. And we watched a small video of Maksym when you were a high schooler, expressing solidarity with the students on hunger strike. And already then you were right at the heart of resistance and of the fight for freedom in Ukraine. And I wanted to ask you, if possible, to reflect also on your generation living through at least 3 revolutions in Ukraine and the different forms of this mutual aid and collective practices and how they have shaped perhaps what we witness on the ground or have shaped also your human rights work as well.
Yes, a revolution in Granite, it was 1990. It was the end of last millennia, I'm afraid. It was a long time ago. And I was 13 years old when I was making that speech at the rally. It was my first public speech ever. I didn't know that it's actually recorded and that this video is preserved. So it was a surprise for me. But these were turbulent times when Soviet system crumbled. And at the end of the day, Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. There were a lot of kids with ideas, who were really interested into social events and social movements which appeared. And I was one of those kids with ideas. Then there were 90s, which were a difficult time when a lot of people became disenfranchised and disillusioned by economic hardships they were going through. But still, it was time of certain liberty, at least some part of it. And when Ukrainian system under President Kuchma became more and more authoritarian, actually there were enough people from my generation, but also younger generations, who prevented Ukraine from taking authoritarian path. And I believe that the Revolution in Granite was the first experience in 1990, but the Orange Revolution in 2004 was the next important experience of how collective action taken in solidarity by people can actually change the future, can have an impact upon what path we are going down. And this is, of course, something that found its peak in Revolution of Dignity, in Maidan protest of 2013-2014. Apparently, when I was in captivity, my interrogators in the first several weeks when we were interrogated, and later on, a few times, the guards, they asked us, were you at Maidan? It was 8 years before the full-scale invasion, so it was more than 8 years before our captivity. But this question was important for them. Were we part of Maidan revolution? And when I said, yes, I was, and I was, they were puzzled. They asked us questions. How dared you to protest against the authorities? Didn't you understand it's stupid? How dared you to go to the streets and protest against the power? the power those rulers up there, they will have their way anyway. You are not able to influence anything. You were manipulated by oligarchs, Americans, and Europeans. They could not, to me, it was another illustration to what extent human agency is absent from that worldview. People cannot really change anything in that worldview. They cannot take collective action. They cannot implement their agency and influence their own future. While for us, it was the opposite. We had inside ourselves of Ukrainian prisoners of war, we had heated political debates, actually, between different people with different political affiliations and regional origins, etc. But what was common was that everyone thought we have a power to change the future if we need to, if we want to. And that was starkly different from the worldview I've encountered. And I believe this line, which is now already a value and almost a tradition in Ukrainian society, it can be traced back both to Maidan of 2013-14, 2004, but also to Revolution in Granite in 1990. So that was a line when people learned through their actions that they have a say and they can influence their own future.
How important it is to be able to imagine what is possible, right?
Yeah.
To change that frame
and to act accordingly.
Yeah, and only through trust and reliance on the other, as you mentioned. And you talk already about solidarity and the importance of solidarity with each other within Ukraine, but also with Ukraine. And obviously you've been involved in a lot of solidarity work, and it is work. It's not just saying words, but it actually takes work. And I wanted to ask you if you could tell us how does solidarity with Ukraine and solidarity from Ukraine with other places look like today? And yeah, what does it take to actually do that work despite all the challenges?
Yeah, well, currently I hear quite often from my colleagues, also publicly, that Ukrainians only recently learned how important is international solidarity, which goes all directions. So, for instance, when my colleagues go places to speak about Ukraine, and sometimes they are asked by representatives of different corners of the world, did Ukrainians show solidarity with other peoples in other places which were at crisis? And actually, Ukraine for quite some time was pretty much inward-looking country. It was not very interested in what's going on elsewhere, apart from its neighborhood. But I think things change now, actually. So people, of course, we are all consumed by the news about our war and our resistance. But people are interested about what's going on elsewhere. Would it be in the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, Syria, or other corners of the world, especially because suddenly Ukraine happened to be in the very heart of international processes which are going on and shifts in the international system. So, for instance, everything is related to Ukraine now. Would there be events in Gaza, or would there be overall confusion about Greenland, for instance? Ukrainians take it closely. When it comes to international solidarity, it was important for Ukrainians to feel it, both in symbolic way, but also it takes very tangible forms, starting with arms supplies and economic aid, and ending with cooperation on legal matters in bringing those responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity to justice. Because a lot of human rights organizations in Ukraine are currently busy with documenting war crimes committed by Russian forces and crimes against humanity. And well, Ukrainians say that it's not that they say, but it is a genocidal war because it aims at not at conquering new territories, but at destruction of Ukraine as an independent entity, and it should be treated as such. At the same time, it is obvious that news from Ukraine were caught in this news cycle when in the first year it was everywhere, and then it started to go down, and currently we don't see much about Ukraine because, okay, they have this war for 4 years now. Well, Russian troops are advancing very slowly, bit by bit, but there are no decisive breakthroughs from either side. So, and there are more news from other regions of the world. So Ukraine kind of goes down. And of course, it influences international solidarity as well. But we understand that peace is possible only when it is too expensive and economically and technically impossible for Russia to continue its assault. And it is possible only due to international pressure, sanctions, and more limits to Russian resources. So without international solidarity, peace will not come. This is quite obvious for us.
I'll ask maybe my last question and open the Q&A. So if you can think of a question to ask, I'll ask kind of two questions in one, building on this on the discussion about solidarity. And part of me wants to believe that experience of violence kind of cultivates a different form of compassion, maybe in Ukrainians as well, towards others who experience violence somewhere else, and hopefully we can build on it. And when we talked today earlier, you also mentioned that people in the military are exposed very often to people with different political views, with different trajectories in life, and that kind of creates this exchange and a dialogue within the society of Ukraine today. And I wanted to ask you to maybe expand on that and to, thinking of miracles and the possibilities, how would that society look like post-war and how we can build further on that? And also the big question of peace, and what is your vision of peace and justice and future for Ukraine that everybody seems to be talking about these days everywhere else? And it would be great to hear from somebody who's actually right at the heart of it and fighting for it.
These are two huge questions.
These are very huge questions.
Yeah.
Feel free to leave one of them unanswered.
Thank you. Well, when it comes to Ukraine's future, there are more questions than answers about it, of course, because in foreseeable future, even when the war stops, and it will end sooner or later, Ukraine has a very difficult task because it will live next to Russia as long as Russia exists in its current form. Well, judging from historical experience of centuries, unfortunately, would it be Russian Empire or Soviet Union or current stage? Judging from that, it will always be a threat to Ukraine as long as it is in its current form, and it will have these imperialist ambitions. So Ukraine should live as a camp prepared to defend itself, which is difficult because at the same time, Ukraine should preserve itself as being a democratic country, a country with which keeps its own values, democratic values, keeps civil liberties and human rights at the very core of what's going on. And it's very difficult to walk this very fine line between being almost militarized society, but also at the same time free society. It is a very difficult task. Ukraine, for some reason, somehow currently is able to do that. And we should continue to do that, although it's difficult. One of the unexpected for me effects which war had on big part, probably majority of Ukrainian society, it made it more tolerant. Because all Ukrainians of all ethnic origins, all mother tongues, all regional affiliations, political beliefs, religious affiliations, sexual orientations, are united in defending Ukraine. And it is very difficult to be prejudiced against certain group of people if you are physically or mentally in the same trench with these people defending your country. So we see how many people actually become more tolerant, more open-minded towards other communities which live in Ukraine, because we are all united by the same goal, to defend our country, taking that this country is diverse, keeping this as a baseline. So this is diversity which gives us strength. It's not a weakness. It does not produce any strifes or conflicts at the moment, at least. So this is probably one of those things which serves as a prerequisite to our possible more free and democratic future. But of course, it can be realized only when there is peace. And peace is not a ceasefire, of course. And peace is not even a peace agreement, because we understand that if Ukraine doesn't have a viable, real, technical, tangible, practical security guarantees, not another Budapest Memorandum or Minsk Agreement or something, but really what happens if Russia launches its attacks. Every ceasefire or every peace agreement would be just a pause, during which Russia will regroup itself and relaunch its assault against Ukraine. So again, peace is possible only when for Russia it will be too expensive and technically impossible to wage an aggressive war against Ukraine. It is possible only with international cooperation, of course, with our international partners. To what extent they are willing to do whatever is needed remains to be seen. Yeah, we had the significant change 1 year ago when the framework of our relations with the United States changed. And unfortunately, in the last year, the assistance from the United States to Ukraine in what was perceived by Ukrainians as a common struggle came to zero. But of course, the United States remain the power which can force Russia to cease its aggression. It is possible. It is a matter of political will, and it is a matter of strength. To what extent this power is strong enough and wants to be strong enough in defense of the common values. But I believe that together with our international allies, we'll manage to do that sooner or later. But of course, it is a war of attrition. So Ukrainian resources are incomparable with Russian resources, even with current international aid. So it's very difficult to predict when the peace will come. But when it comes, we should be ready both to defend ourselves, but also to defend our values, being free and living in mutual respect and diversity without fear.
Thank you so much. And maybe we'll open up the floor to the room, and maybe when you ask the question, if you could introduce yourself. And, yeah.
Oh, there is a mic.
Yeah, there's a microphone. Oh, I can walk around too.
First of all, thank you so much. You inspired many of us today a lot. My name is Christina. I'm a student of Kyiv School of Economics and here a student at UChicago now. And I just want to thank you for speaking on behalf of many prisoners of war. My best childhood friend was joined the military before the full-scale invasion, and he was a defender of Mariupol. He was captured too, and he was released thanks to people like you. And he's in the military, and many of his friends are still there, so thank you for speaking on their behalf. I have a question about the probably key key messages that I think it's important to share. I'm an international student, and there are many students of us from Ukraine, and sometimes we just have a few minutes when other students ask us, like, what should I know about Ukraine? What should I know about the Korean War? I would really appreciate your advice, since you do so much advocacy on the messages that you think are the most important to share. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a huge question as well. Well, to me, it's still surprising when I have encounters with different audiences from time to time, not often though, but from time to time hear this opinion that this is a war for territories in the first place. To me, it is important that people understand it is not. So suggestions like, guys, we sympathize with you as with the underdog. You know, you were unprovokedly attacked by brutal Russian regime, but you cannot withstand this assault. So the sooner you give up, the better. Less people will die. And then, okay, you will give up certain territories, but then it will be peace. And this is a huge misconception, of course, because, well, in the first place, occupation is not peace. Occupation is continuation of war. It's another form of war. And by talking to people who lived in occupation, to me personally, captivity I lived through is some sort of occupation of one person, while occupation is captivity of many. Of course, people have control over their everyday agenda to an extent, but they don't have any agency, they don't have any influence upon what happens to them tomorrow. And of course, occupation is repression on massive scale, so it's continuation of war. And another thing is that, yes, Russia is not interested in territories. It's interested in destruction of Ukraine. So this is an existential war for Ukrainians. And I believe this is something that should be understood. And the second point is, which I've already mentioned, even those who sympathize with Ukraine, but say, or treat this war as some distant local conflict between Russia and Ukraine, I think they misunderstand the situation. Russia is not interested only in taking Ukraine in its orbit, although it does, well, destroying Ukraine and include it into its empire. They want to be an empire, but they want to see a world being replaced by a world of empires. And they aim at destruction of what remains of international rules. And if we have common values, really, if we value human dignity and human agency and human rights, then one should understand that this is a common struggle. So I believe that people who treat it as a local conflict, they don't understand that they are already in the same boat with Ukrainians. So to me, it is difficult to swallow sometimes, especially in Europe, because in Europe it also brings, war closer, and psychologically it can be difficult to digest. But I believe this is something that should be understood. It's not some local distant conflict. It is a conflict which is reflecting all the main challenges to what's going on now in the world. And this is concentrated in Ukraine.
Thank you so much for your work, and thank you for coming here to speak with us. My name is Scott Gelbach. I'm a professor in the political science department in the Harris School here at Chicago. You talked a little bit about your captors, and I was wondering if you feel comfortable if you could push on that a little bit more. I guess I'm interested in what it is that allows one human to perpetrate human rights abuses on another, and what you learned from your experience in captivity that helped you to understand that. Were your captors, were they selected for their cruelty? Were they uniformly cruel? Were they consumers of Russian propaganda? Were they competing for rewards? What do you understand their motivations to have been?
Thank you. They were different, of course. as every group of people is diverse, so they were different. I met not many, fortunately, but some persons who enjoyed it. So, I mean, physically, it looked like they take physical pleasure in humiliating and inflicting pain upon the others. So basically, sadists who found their way and found their place in this situation. They were not the majority. They were just few selected individuals, but they felt extremely comfortable under these circumstances. There were others who treated us as enemies, especially among the local collaborators. The most of the guards were local collaborators. Those who fought against Ukraine since 2014, they still perceived us as enemies whom they fought against on the battlefield. Although there were others who kind of, I wouldn't say sympathized with us, no, it's too strong of a word, but who kind of just thought that we are unfortunate, and they still remember that we've been citizens of the same country years ago. It was a little bit different with the majority of Russians. Because interrogators were mostly Russians, while the guards were collaborators. And Russians treated us as a job. They didn't have, most of them didn't have any emotional attachment. Some of them were more cruel, some of them even, to an extent possible under the circumstances, humane. But I knew that even the humane ones, if they're ordered tomorrow to break me, they would do it without any second thought. And the majority of those who are involved in all the procedures, I think they took it as a job. It's like they are part of the machinery. They don't have any say, they don't have any influence, so they just should do their job. They consumed Russian propaganda. I actually was surprised by, I think I underestimated Russian propaganda before I went into captivity. It's not sophisticated per se, but it packages same narratives in different forms for different audiences. And let's not forget that the media number one in Russia, it's still television. It's not internet. Internet is mostly used for entertainment purposes. And television has different TV channels. Each has its own audience, and same narratives are packaged for different audiences in different ways. But they create parallel reality for years. People live in it for years. So they, even those who seemed to be almost sometimes critical, I mean, among the interrogators or the guards about official propaganda, when they started to speak about politics, it was Russian television speaking out of their mouths. They didn't know any other narratives. And I think it was also about psychological comfort. They were comfortable with it. In general, Russian propaganda, it's less about rational arguments. It's very contradictory in itself. I mean, the picture of Ukraine we were presented by our interrogators consisted of messages like, Ukraine is not an existing country. It does not exist. It is destroyed by corruption. It is ruled by Americans. You won't even believe how much Americans were in the picture at the time. As far as I know, currently Americans are replaced mostly with Europeans, but Ukraine is ruled by someone. At the same time, it is ruled locally by Nazis, of course, Ukrainian Nazis, and gays, all at the same time. And it just, they didn't see any contradiction in it. Because propaganda is not rational, and it's very difficult to argue, to go into rational argument. It is more about feeling of belonging and about psychologically comfortable version of the world. So, yeah, our interrogators, they mostly felt like they're part of the state machine. They made their career. They were competing for, like, for instance, to fabricate a criminal case and successfully make it through the court, etc., of course, gave a push upon career ladder. And they didn't care about those who are convicted. No, we didn't matter. Human beings don't really matter. Yeah, that was in their worldview. No.
The war and also on the Russian society for it to become so extremist and the way it is and the continuation of the war?
Yes, well, of course, Vladimir Putin, in a way, when aging dictator starts to write pseudo-historical articles about the history of neighboring peoples, it's always a dangerous sign. Like, it's always not good. So when his text about historical unity of Russian and Ukrainian people appeared in publication in 2021, it was a bad sign. It was a bad omen, of course. And he seems to be motivated personally and ideologically. Well, of course he wants to, it's all my subjective guesses. You know, I have no idea what goes on in his head, probably fortunately. But he seems to want to go down in Russian history as this gatherer of former Russian Empire to make Russia an empire again. And he is surrounded by people who share this ideology, more or less. At the same time, he is not fallen from the sky. He is a reflection of a demand from a big part of Russian society. When he appeared in the year 2000 at the helm of Russia, there was a demand for this strong hand, strong man who would lead the country, who would preserve its unity and give people certain assurances. His KGB background, which would be a negative factor for Ukrainians, is a positive factor for many Russians. So he is like, you know, former KGB man, it's good. So I definitely disagree also from my own experience with those who say that, you know, Russian regime is bad, but Russian society is okay. That Russian society doesn't really want war. It's all about bad Russian regime. And if bad Russian regime is replaced with good Russian regime, then everything is fine. No, I don't think it's the case. I think it's not true. The majority of Russian society, of course, being subjected to intense propaganda and hate speech towards Ukrainians and the West for years. And hate speech played enormous role in preparation of this genocidal war. But still the majority of the society either supports the war, which they don't call war. We remember it's special military operation. Anyone who says it's war has a chance to go to jail, or at least tolerates it. And I believe also that Russian society sooner or later, maybe not this generation, maybe next generation, but they will have to deal with an issue of collective responsibility, both for actions and for inaction, for not preventing this genocidal war from happening. So in this regard, Putin's regime shaped Russian society, but also it reflects Russian society's demands. It's a mutual process. We have a different mic now.
Oh, okay. Oh, very fortunate. Hi, Maxime. Good to talk to you again. I'm Tim Jenkins. I represent People in Need. We're one of the largest nonprofits in Europe. We work together a bit with you on our human rights agenda. I'm a bit ashamed to actually kind of admit this. I'm inspired by your story, of course, but I didn't realize until you were speaking that I don't really understand what life is like in the occupied territories. I speak to my colleagues daily in Ukraine. Of course, we're concerned about humanitarian issues. But I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on some of the stories you've heard from people that have lived in the occupied territories, maybe gotten out or not gotten out. But I would appreciate any insight that you could give, because I realize it's a gap in my knowledge as well. And I think a gap probably in a lot of Americans, if I can be frank. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, when it comes to the occupied territories, of course, there are different phases people in the occupied territories go through. There is an initial phase of occupation, which is the stage of arbitrary violence, of course, also targeting all those potentially unloyal to the occupied forces. We encountered, as I said, evidences of that when we took part in the liberation of Kyiv region, widespread looting as well, which is a norm. But then when it goes down the time, those who lived in occupied territories since 2014, they slowly get used to these new rules. New rules are usually characterized by, omnipotence of occupied forces. So, for instance, someone who is targeted by either occupying forces or by local proxies who control the territory, they usually don't have any tools to influence their own fate. This is why Ukraine is currently another country which has to deal with an issue of enforced disappearances, for instance. It's quite a usual practice that people are snatched from their homes overnight by some unknown people wearing uniforms with no insignia, and they just disappear. When I was in captivity in some of the cells in the prison of Luhansk, I met not only Ukrainian POWs, but also civilians who were under so-called preventive arrest. It is a norm which has been introduced in the so-called Luhansk People's Republic. As far as I know, in Donetsk region, it was as well, that a person who in his previous life had the story of serving in Ukrainian military or national police, or being part of local self-government, they could be arrested for no reason, with no specific charge, and put under so-called preventive arrest for the time up until 3 months, which then could be extended for next 3 months and next 3 months, and basically indefinitely. And their relatives were not informed about what happened to these people. So these people effectively disappeared, and you didn't know what happened with them until you found yourself in the same cell with them. And then next stages come. Of course, there is pressure upon all public services and educational system. You probably all heard about abducted children of Ukraine. This is a very painful subject. But even those children who were not abducted and sent to Russia proper, they are put under intense pressure at the educational institutions. Teachers are forced to introduce Russian educational programs, Russian curriculum. And there are Russian kids organizations which are encroaching into these territories, which are militarized, and basically they prepare Ukrainian, they try to reshape mentality of Ukrainian kids to say that they're Russians and to prepare them to be Russian soldiers. And of course, now we see that on newly occupied territories, there is a demand of taking Russian passports. So it's not possible currently anymore to live on occupied territories without being officially taking Russian passport and becoming Russian national. everyone who disagrees with that has to leave. And quite often it's not possible to leave occupied territories. It just basically there is no other option but to take a Russian passport. While of course it goes with many other things, as for instance, draft to Russian army for those who reach 18 years, age of 18 years. So these are all different stages population occupied territories go through, but the overall feature on both old and new territories is that all power is in the hands of enforcement agencies, the army, police, and FSB, Russian Security Service, while there is almost no way to appeal against their actions anywhere for people who live there. So it's total powerlessness. Just in very brief.
Hello, my name is Ruyan and I'm a first-year MPP student. I observed two phenomena of Ukraine. The first phenomenon is like there's a huge human trafficking issues in the occupation zones. There are even Russian websites always blatantly selling Ukrainian children on their website. It's a really heartbreaking story, and I wonder like what efforts have Ukrainian government and organizations have done to save and help those children? And my second problem is that I noticed some gambling websites, they have bettings on the Russian and Ukraine wars, and even in the very detailed cities and the counties of the front line. So I wonder, do you think that's actually a kind of like a violation of the human rights? And if so, like what efforts could you adapt to solve that kind of problem? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, on children, I mentioned this issue. Unfortunately, we see that a lot of Ukrainian children, either those which were in children institutions or those which were taken away from their families, were sent to Russia to be adopted by Russian families. And again, their mentality to be reshamed and reprogrammed to be Russians. It is a very painful issue. We don't even know the exact number of these children, but when we talk about those who might be affected by it, it goes into thousands and dozens of thousands. And there are several organizations in Ukraine and projects, both governmental and non-governmental, to address this issue. There is a project, Bring Kids Back. There is Safe Ukraine. There are some others. But the problem is that one has to find a way to force Russia to return these kids. This is why, to me, it is very important that any peace negotiations or negotiations about curfew, in the first place, include human component to it. It is about release of all civilian detainees. It is about exchange of all POWs, and it is about bringing kids back, of course. So, and it shouldn't be the result of it. Ideally, it should be a prerequisite to any peace, also which would demonstrate how seriously Russia takes the negotiations themselves. But so far, we see that there are some successes. There are kids which are brought back. But unfortunately, the numbers of those who are brought back and those who are abducted, they are incomparable. So it is still a very painful issue which should be addressed internationally. Ukraine alone cannot mount sufficient pressure upon Russia to return them. So we have to do it together with our international allies. And yeah, when it comes to betting websites, actually it's quite a new phenomenon for Ukraine, but it starts to be discussed in Ukraine, specifically after, in several cases, the data on those websites seemed to be manipulated in order for someone to get money. Of course, to all Ukrainians I know, it is a totally immoral thing to do. And it is also dangerous because it might influence decision making and it might be a source of corruption. But so far there is very limited set of tools to influence that, because we see these betting websites being proliferating and becoming more and more profitable. They seem to be kind of new black, new in fashion for betting. It is a problem. To be honest with you, I don't know how to address it. I know that some governments, at least in Europe, look into a possibility to ban those websites, although technically it's not easy, but it's possible. But yeah, this is just the beginning of discussion of this problem. So I don't really know how to address it. I would like to see that addressed.
We have maybe 7 minutes. Can we ask for one more question? Can I ask a last question?
Want to ask the last question or unless somebody?
Well, I'll stand up here so that
Yeah.
enough time to walk up. Thank you so much. There are so many clearly areas that draw our attention that are burning crises. What is your next? What is your highest priority? What are you going to do when you go back to Kiev?
I travel quite extensively these days, so this is part of international advocacy. Ukrainian civil society participants try to do for Ukraine, speaking to different audiences, trying to convey messages. Apart from that, I'm going to go back to human rights work because there are a lot of human rights issues to be addressed, of course. I'm hosting a program at Hromadske Radio, that radio station I helped to co-found many years ago, and it's good to be back there. It's a weekly program dedicated to human rights. But also I co-found with this very tiny organization called the Principle of Hope. And currently we are focused mostly on issues related to captivity and those who are released from captivity. I never lost hope that I would be released. Never. There was not a single moment when I didn't have this hope, but I didn't think it would happen that soon. I thought actually I would be released later. And as I mentioned, some of the people whom I was captured together with, they still remained in captivity until recently. One of them is released yesterday, and I'm really happy for him. Another one is still in captivity, and most people whom I spent my time with being convicted on fabricated charges, they're still there. And I'm here speaking to you. So I feel like I have a duty to talk about them and to work to try to help those who are released to reintegrate in Ukrainian society. I think it's my #1 priority at the moment.
Thank you. Well,
yeah, and by the way, one of those first things we've discussed with friends and colleagues when I came back from rehabilitation after my release was what gives people in captivity hope. And we discussed that the main thing to remember in captivity is to know that you are not forgotten, that people think about you and they talk about you and they continue to fight for your release. And we decided to develop visual symbols of solidarity with Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilian detainees, partly inspired by an American symbol. So we designed this, which you can see on my sweatshirt. And we have stickers and badges with this. So a very small number of it I've put on the back there on this room. If you want to take stickers or badges with these symbols, please feel free to do that.
Thank you.
Also, the question of activity, we were talking a little earlier in terms of letters writing, and is it something that we can do from here actually, or in addition to advocacy in terms of support those who are in prison?
It is not easy because I was allowed letter writing in last several months of my captivity, but only because I was a convicted POW, because there was a court session and I've got my sentence. The vast majority of Ukrainian POWs, they are not convicted, they are kept incommunicado, so it's not possible to send letters to them, but to some it's possible, but there are also civilian detainees. And there are Ukrainian prisoners, political prisoners. They are in Russia proper, they are in Crimea, and to them it's possible to write postcards and letters. There are campaigns which support that, so to them it's possible.
We're going to have a little reception afterwards to which you are all invited just outside in the lounge. And you may have more questions about how you can get involved and how you can help. Stickers are in the back, but I want to thank you so much for teaching us and for being here today, and take your chance to have a chat with Maksym afterwards. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.